Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wassalatu wassalamu ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'een. Amma ba'd. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. To my wonderful and beloved Aylesbury community. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless all of you in this beautiful month of Rabiul Awwal al-Sharif. Firstly, my apologies for not being there in person as I had intended, but circumstances here in Istanbul have not allowed me to leave as of yet. So my sincerest apologies for that. Secondly, my warmest welcome to Sheikh Asar Rashid for travelling down from Birmingham to be with us this evening. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless him and increase him in tawfiq and khair and himma. Allahumma ameen. Also, my warmest regards to Ustad Faisal, a long-standing servant of the Aylesbury community, mashallah. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to protect him and to increase him. Allahumma ameen, ya Rabbil Alameen. What I thought I'd do here is just set the tone for what inshallah I hope will be a wonderful evening with the mashayikh, which is to talk just ever so briefly about what is ilmul kalam, and what are some of the reasons why people are going towards ilhad. Firstly, when people think about ilmul kalam, they think it's a set of a doctrine, aqidah, and this is not exactly true. Ilmul Kalam is a system of thought, it's a paradigm, it's a process of separating good creed from bad creed. Just like ulum al-hadith, we study ulum al-hadith to be able to have a tamayyuz between as-sahih was-saqim, sanadan wa matnan, and so we look at what is authentically ascribed to the Prophet ﷺ, in terms of the chain and in terms of the text also, and what is inauthentic. Likewise, ilmul kalam, it does the same thing with creed. At the very beginning, the earliest of mutakallimun were not Sunni mutakallimun. They were Mu'tazila. They were a radical rationalist group, arguably brilliant in terms of their intelligence, but unfortunately misguided. And from them you had some people that noticed that, the likes of al-Imam al-Azim, Abu al-Hasan al-Ash'ari, radiyallahu anhu warda, who noticed, realized, and he himself was being nurtured by his uncle Abu Ali al-Jubba'i to take the seat of al-i'tizal. So he fully understood this tradition, but also understood its flaws. And this is the beginning of that journey of Sunni Kalam. Of course, you have the Imam al-Huda, Abu Mansur al-Maturidi. You have the great Imams, the grand students of Imam al-Ash'ari himself, such as al-Baqilani, Abdul Qadir, etc. These are great A'immah. And this is the first wave of Sunni Kalam. I'm going to say Sunni Kalam because it includes Al-Asha'ira wal-Maturidiyya. And in certain times within our history, a sort of mazj, synthesis between them where there is a lot of overlapping. So I'm going to say Sunni Kalam. This is the first wave. We see a second wave where these arguments are fleshed out using a lot more philosophy. And this is a period where you see the great Imams such as Imam al-Juwayni, Imam al-Haramain, great Imams like Imam al-Ghazali, radiyallahu anhu warda, up to the likes of Imam Fakhruddin al-Razi. Now this is a heavyweight theological period. Strong theologians, great ulama with great writings, great books, great refutations of falsafa, a very important period within the Sunni Kalam tradition. Then you have a sort of third wave that begins with Imam al-Razi, opening the doors to a lot more philosophy, arguably manifested really perfectly in the likes of al-Imam Jalaluddin al-Dawani, radiyallahu anhu arda, and subsequently his students such as al-Mabzi or al-Maybudi. These are great Imams who then also incorporate things from the Shirazi school, a lot more hikmah, a lot more tasawwuf, falsafat at-tasawwuf. This is the philosophy of the Sufis, some of the Sufis that were inclined more towards ta'bir or explaining their experiences in philosophical language, a lot more incorporating of that within their works. The Ottomans are a little bit different. The Ottoman tradition sort of has this synthesis between Kalam and Sufism since its very inception by Dawood al-Kaysari, radiallahu anhu warda, and throughout its tradition, with very little contention within the Ottoman Empire. There was some, but very little. Then you have a sort of fourth period that I like to consider to be a fourth phase, and this manifests quintessentially within the 17th and 18th centuries of the Farangi Mahal tradition. This is the tradition that gives birth to the great curriculum of Dars al-Nizami. Many of the ulama in the UK and even today, this is the curriculum that they would have studied in their Darul-Ulooms, in their seminaries. Now, this is a period of open synthesis between four essential paradigms. You have the traditional Kalam, Ash'ira wal Maturidiyya. You have the synthesis with the Falsafat, the Tasawwuf, whether that is Akbarianism in the form of Shaykh al-Akbar ibn Arabi, or whether that is Ishraq, which is the school of As-Suhrawardi al-Maqtul, and traditional Hikmah, traditional philosophy, peripatetic philosophy, Aristotelian philosophy, all put together, still with a heavy reliance on the traditional Kalam tradition, and the positions are largely those positions, but using different styles of discussion and of argumentation, a much wider metaphysics than what we saw before. So the Kalam tradition has its evolution, it goes through its journey, but at its heart, the focus has always been the truth. And this is what the Kalam tradition offers. The Kalam tradition is a paradigm of thinking of creed, of belief, of doctrine, of morality, moral ontology, that conforms and corresponds to truth. When I say I'm a Muslim, I have al-i'tiqad, a belief, which is al-jazim, firm, I with certainty, but also it is al-mutabiq lil-waqi' fi nafs al-amr. It conforms to reality as it is. Meaning that when I say, for example, that these are spectacles, I can bring you 100 different types of spectacles, and each time you will be able to say that's a spectacle. That's a spectacle. Why? Why can you do that? The universal concept that you have in your mind that allows you to identify each and every extramental particular within the world, why is it that you're able to do that? Because that concept is true. It conforms and corresponds to a truth. That truth, in terms of mainstream Ash'ariism, mainstream Sunni Kalam, it's because this thing in and of itself is a pair of spectacles. For some of the later mutakallimun that imbibed more falsafat at-tasawwuf, this conforms, this truth corresponds to the knowledge of God or to the realm of the a'yan. That's not relevant for us to discuss at this point here. But the fact is that truth corresponds to something. It's not a mere projection of my mind. It's not my imagination. Truth does not correspond to my mind. I'm not going to say that these are a pair of spectacles because that corresponds to my mind. No, it is in and of itself true. That is the central, most important function of Ilm al-Kalam. Correspondence. The theory of correspondence, of truth, as they call it. This is the central, most fundamental function of Ilm al-Kalam. Because everything that you believe has to correspond to truth. And this is what Ilm al-Kalam offers. This is what Ilm al-Kalam achieves. So I now, as a Muslim, have a paradigm of viewing the world. My moral ontology is true and corresponds to the knowledge of God, or to what God has ordained. We are also divine command theorists. We believe that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one that tells you the moral value of any particular act, whether it's good or evil. God. It corresponds to the amr or nahi, the command or the forbidding of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So this is what the paradigm offers. Let's look at the alternative. The alternative is ilhad, secular liberal atheism, which is shocking since atheism, in Latin, is a negation. This is salb. It's a qadiyya salbiya. And qadiyya salbiya is a type of tasdeeq in our tradition. Meaning, when I say that something is something, what we call al-qadiyya al-ijabiyya or al-mujiba, or I say that this is not something, I negate it. I negate the predication from the subject. I say this is not something. Al-qadiyya as-saliba. I can only do this with tasdeeq, which is what? Which essentially is certainty, or as close as you can get, ghalabatul dhann, that this actually is the case. So now for me to say this is not something, like atheism, this is the tasdeeq. You are making a negation that must be rooted in knowledge. It must be rooted in knowledge. What knowledge does anybody have that God does not exist? What proof does anybody have that God does not exist? So it's, for somebody to say secular liberal atheism is really a contradiction. Because for you to be secular and liberal, secular, just no role of religion, fine. But for you to be a liberal, essentially for you to be an idealist, which means that everything that you are experiencing is an expression of your imagination. Let me say that again. Everything that you are experiencing is an expression of your imagination. Ontologically and epistemologically for some as well. That the world itself is really a projection of your mind and your imagination. And even knowledge itself. And so we can never have absolute truth or never actually know something with any kind of level of certainty. So for you to be one to accept that paradigm, you are essentially accepting a paradigm that says, I don't know what is right or what is wrong. I don't know anything. Nothing is even real. This here is where we have a big problem. A big problem because this is fundamental to the corrosion of life itself. Because narcissism comes from exactly that. Because you are the most important thing, since nothing else is actually real except your experiences. Your experiences are all that are real. And narcissism is never going to be good for this world. That's number one. Secondly, if there is no truth, then لَقَالَ مَنْ شَاءَ مَا شَاءَ. Then anybody can say whatever they want. Which means that you can have the most extreme of extremists. But if it's live your truth, as we hear it today, where do you think that these proverbs or these slogans come from? Live your truth. Beauty is in the eye of the beholder. No, it's not. No, it's not. Something is beautiful in and of itself. You may not have the eye to see it, but things are beautiful. Truth is truth. You may not have the heart to accept it, but truth is truth in and of itself. Corresponds to reality as it is. Which alternative makes more sense? On the one hand, look at the nata'ij, the outcomes of such a paradigm, like a radical secular liberalism, where there is absolutely no truth except your imagination. This is causing for chaos, and this is why Hobbes imagined the role of the state, because he believed that human beings are inherently evil, and that the only way that you can have a level of a world without chaos and anarchy is to have state that governs people, where you have these mutual benefits for which you have these checks and balances now that allow you and stop you from harming other people, and etc, etc, etc. Even that, I would argue, that say, but why do you need to have a state to put checks and balances to remove anarchy? What's wrong with anarchy anyway? What's wrong with anarchy? How can you prove that anarchy is bad? How can you prove that stealing is bad? Murder is bad? You cannot prove any of these things unless you have a clear paradigm of thought. So people that go towards atheism go because of these immoralities that they are objecting to God because of. They will look and say, how can God say X, Y, and Z? How can God do X, Y, and Z? There's evil in the world, so how can there be God? Okay. There's something that you don't like, and therefore there's no God. So how do you know that this, whatever it is that you don't like, is wrong? And it's definitely not true. There's no way you can make that argument. Whatever you are preaching as theists, or let's say Muslims in our regard, whatever you are preaching, I don't like it, I don't agree with it, it goes against my conception of human rights and X, Y, and Z. Okay. Why don't you like it? Because it's wrong. Prove it's wrong. Because I don't like it. My feelings, my imagination. When your imagination versus my imagination. And this is why when push comes to shove, really what it comes down to is, well, no. What I mean is the imagination of the West. The imagination of the secular liberal West, of what we like, what we collectively, I say collectively, it's not agreed upon. They can't even agree on politics. Nobody agrees on pretty much anything. But we as a collective have decided to agree on that we like this. But you don't collectively agree on anything. You've got the right fighting the left. You've got woke on one side. You've got conservatives on the other side. You've got people sat in between. You've got people all over the place. Look at the tafawut bayn al-nas. Look at this. These differences between people. Why? Because you do not have a system that allows you to think and to believe and to know things that correspond to truth. You don't have a system. It's like trying to get to a different city and you have no vehicle to take you there. You don't even have legs to walk on. No train, no car, no bus. You've got no way to get there because you do not have a system that is rooted in God. The only way you can have a moral framework that is true and absolute is if it is anchored in reality. You take realism away, and this is why, and I'll end on this. When you look at most of our books in Kalam, many of them, La Siyama, namely the books of the Maturidis, they will begin with حقائق الأشياء ثابتة والعلم بها متحققة. That the essence of things are real, and you can have knowledge of it too. Meaning that we are realists ontologically and epistemologically. That's what that statement means. That we believe that this world and knowledge and being able to affirm and negate all of this is real and conforms to an actual reality as it is, irrespective of my imagination and the fard of a fard, of anybody's imagination. It is completely separate from our minds. We know it through our minds. That's a system that allows you to have sanity. That's a system that allows you to have certainty. That's a system that allows you to have absoluteness. This is why ilm al-Kalam is a paradigm that allows one to think and view the world and to distinguish between what is right and what is wrong, because you have a true, sound correspondence to what actually is. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us tawfiq and himmah. I hope that this will be a great evening. I just wanted to open up and set the tone for what we really mean when we talk about kalam and when we're talking about dealing with atheism. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for himmah, for tawfiq. Barakallahu feekum. I ask you for du'as, inshallah ta'ala, and you all are always in my du'as. Barakallahu feekum. Jazakumullahu khairan. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.